Hi, my name is Dawn Rowe, and today we're going to talk about engaging as stakeholders in transition program improvement for state and local districts. As many of you know, there are some federal reporting requirements under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. States are required to submit a state performance plan and an annual performance report. PowerPoints are available to you. In those PowerPoints, there are links to access your state or is SPPAPR. The indicators ultimately are useful in helping us plan for program improvement. It's all about purposeful planning while they're in school and the chain of outcomes that youth might achieve. In-school activities are really related to that indicator 13, the quality transition components of the IEP. So youth having post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition assessment, and then services and supports that will lead to those post-secondary goals. Those quality services in school will lead to increased graduation rates for youth with disabilities and decreased dropout rates, which then ultimately lead to more youth achieving positive outcomes after they leave high school, whether it's higher education, post-secondary, other post-secondary ed and training, competitive employment, or other employment. It's all about preparing for an informed conversation. You know, how is your state and local district using post-school outcome data for decision making, for accountability, and for transition program improvement? So to begin with, I would start by reading the Indicator 14 section of your state's SPPAPR. Ask to see a copy of the post-school outcomes survey, and be sure that you understand the questions the states are asking. If you have additional questions, always ask your state transition coordinator for clarification, just to make sure you understand how the data is collected, what information is collected, and making sure that it's valid and reliable. Key is contacting your transition coordinator to really discuss ways that families or parent advocates or VR counselors or any other community service providers can really support the use of the post-school outcomes finding in local and district planning. So I urge you to join a stakeholder team and support the use of post-school outcome data collection. You know, really thinking about how your school or district is comparing to other schools and districts like you. Looking at the patterns in the data by disability, by gender, exit type, race, ethnicity. Thinking about areas of the school or district where youth are engaged at higher rates and what you think might contribute to those higher rates of engagement in those areas. Really looking at policies and procedures that might be affecting graduation or dropout or engagement. There's lots of things that, external factors that we may or may not have control over that really are contributing to these outcomes. And then last but not least, really thinking about those actions a district can take to improve engagement rates. It's all about ensuring that youth have programs and services and supports that are accessible and that will lead to those positive outcomes once they leave school. All about good planning, making sure that all the resources and time and money that we invest in the activities and interventions that we complete while youth are in school are aimed at improving those particular outcomes we're targeting, whether it be implementation of evidence-based practices, increased engagement rates, teacher knowledge. It all starts with data-based decision making. Again, looking at data within the context of your state, your district, and your school. Making sure that you've gathered the right type of information that you need in order to make action on and to begin to make those decisions. So really turning information into actionable knowledge and making decisions about addressing specific student needs, prioritizing students' needs, developing action plans and implementation, enhancing those processes for improving outcomes for youth with disabilities. So data really leads to information. It has to be organized in a meaningful way in order to generate that information. So when stakeholders begin to interpret numbers, they begin to make meaning of the data. It's really important that you're viewing data graphically so that you can identify those patterns in use in school transition experiences and programs. So that's really key. You know, what do these data tell us? That's the question you should be asking as a stakeholder group. Examining youth in that not engaged category, are they students really doing nothing, or are they just not meeting the criteria to be in a certain category? Really kind of digging deeper into that not engaged group, you know, looking at responses for who answered yes to having enrolled in any type of school, and then who answered if they didn't attend, how many attended 2 years or 4 years, how many actually completed a full term. You know, maybe youth are enrolling in post-secondary ed, but they're not completing that term, and those patterns begin to tell us information that we can take action on. So moving action or information into actionable knowledge. So when stakeholders began to synthesize information from the various sources of data, and they began to apply judgment to prioritize this information, considering all the merits of the different possible solutions, then they're moving this information into actionable knowledge, something that they can actually start to begin making decisions on. You got to consider data from multiple sources again, looking at the indicator data, but don't just limit yourself to indicator data. Get outside of the box. You know, what other data is important to contributing outcomes? Attendance data is important, behavior data is important, it could be test scores, scheduling, and begin to prioritize your needs based on the data, the sources that you have. So turning actionable knowledge into decision, using that actionable knowledge, decisions really can be made about changes, what needs to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed. Really begin examining the transition program components, how students have access to those transition services, what services the students need, and then begin looking at fidelity of implementation of services. So if you're providing services, how well are you implementing that intervention? Are you implementing it as it was meant to be? And then begin to, the big question is how do we do all of this? You know, given the limitations of time and money and involvement in others. So, you know, you really want to focus on, there's a lot of focus on other educational initiatives, and so sometimes we have to kind of step back and prioritize and begin to think how we can do this given our current circumstances. You know, really the answer is to be smart, know your data, make sure you're targeting specific populations of youth, allocating those resources appropriately in order to ensure that you're focusing on the right target population, and implementing those in-school predictors of post-school success. These are programs that we know have evidence to support that youth participating in them are more likely to achieve success later in life. Again, using evidence-based practices in the classroom. These are interventions that we know from research are effective in increasing students' transition knowledge, whether it be employment skills or independent living life skills or academic skills. So a predictor of post-school success, a predictor is really an in-school experience. It's typically kind of a program such as work-based learning that's correlated with improved post-school outcomes, meaning that youth participating in this program are more likely to achieve better outcomes than youth who are not participating in the program. There are 16 predictors of post-school success. Actually, there's 17 now. There's parent engagement is a new predictor that has just been identified. And they predict in all areas. They predict outcomes in employment. They predict outcomes in education and independent living. The X's, if you're referring to your PowerPoint slide, the X's in the chart doesn't mean it doesn't predict in an area if there's not an X. It just means at this current moment there's not research to support it. So it's very possible that it could also, one of the predictors could predict in other outcome areas. So evidence-based practices, again, another key piece of being smart. Those are just the teaching methods used to teach a specific skill that's been shown to be effective based on high-quality research. So we're wanting to use evidence-based practices in our classroom to teach those transition skills to youth with disabilities. Those are the kind of target interventions we should be thinking about implementing as we begin our planning process. Evidence-based practice really kind of support implementation of predictors of post-school success. Again, predictors are kind of those program, big picture things. Evidence-based practice really helps the instruction and support as youth move through there. Your PowerPoint gives you some examples of evidence-based practices that support particular predictors. The stakeholders' role in district-based data making is, it's the same across stakeholders, whether you're a family member, a VR counselor, a school provider. You really are there to assist in analyzing and interpreting the data, prioritizing the needs, establishing SMART goals, selecting those specific strategies, making decisions and planning actions, and then really monitoring and evaluating those results over time to make sure that you really are achieving what you set out to achieve to begin with. There are many resources out there to support your efforts in implementing evidence-based practices and predictors, or to do more with action planning. The National Post-School Outcomes Center has a predictor self-assessment to help. It's a tool to help you begin thinking about how you're implementing the predictors, or what components of the predictors. And this is a tool that was developed in collaboration with NSTAC, which is another resource that also includes evidence-based practices and predictors. So check out the resources that are available to you. So that's all we have for today.